All right. So let's do a hook and lift map of the Raw remix from Tony Romera. Now, this is a track that is obviously a remix, but I'm not going to compare this track to the original version. It does a lot of what the original version does, but for this tutorial, I want to treat this as if this was a production that was just done from scratch, basically, by Tony Romera here, because I want to look at the merits of the track. Now, this assumes that, or I guess it excludes the nostalgic value for why this track did so well, because it hit number one. So I'm not going to, obviously, we can't really dissect the impact that nostalgia or the original had on this track. So I'm going to assume that this hit number one because of the merits of the track. And I've got to say, when I heard this track, when I listened to it, I was blown away. This does so many things just so efficiently and so effectively that I talk about in these breakdowns that it's almost like they produced this track just so I could break it down, because there's obviously not, but there's just so much good stuff in here that I can't wait to dive into. Yeah, with that said, let's get it going. Let me make sure I have the right output here. So preferences, and then we'll select the loom output. There we go. And what can I say right off the bat other than, what we're going to do is a hook and lift map. Now, there's obviously very minimal elements here, but a hook and lift map is where we're interested in the arrangement. That's what it's all about. There's another breakdown that I just did, which is the Mal P Drugs from Amsterdam, which is an incredible arrangement. But the thing that I really took away from that Mal P arrangement or breakdown was the mix is really kind of lacking. What I would say is it's a minimal level mix. This mix is spot on because it's a tool room mix and they have an in-house engineer. But what it goes to show is just how important arrangement is. And arrangement, I think, is one of the most difficult things for producers to wrap their head around. Mixing, I mean, if you're using the guillotine mixing style, you can get your mixes up to a professional level in a couple hours. You can learn how to mix in the guillotine style and get them up to a professional level in maybe 1 or 2 months, easy. So mixing is technical. There's benchmarks. We could just check off the benchmarks. It sounds good, great. It'll work in the club. That's done, right? And so it's very quantifiable. But arrangement doesn't really have any kind of quantifiable aspects, at least initially. When arrangements mostly talked about, it's very vague in general, intro, drop. But what do we do inside the drop? What do we do in these things? And that's what the hook and lift maps and all the breakdowns that we do in this course are all about, is trying to understand arrangement and create benchmarks for arrangement that we can hit that are based off of what's working, so that we can do less thinking on that side and more creating. So we can operate within the parameters of what works and create really effective arrangements that are expressing our ideas in the best way. And that's what this is all about. And this track does that. It just is so effective and it's so simple. And it's mind blowing because it's just two things. It's a groove and it's that boop sound design hook. This is it. So it takes that groove and it takes that hook and somehow manages to make it interesting over, 5 minutes. How? Right? That's what this is all about. That's what the hook and lift maps are all about, is breaking down and understanding arrangements, because in my opinion, that is by far the most important thing, the development of the hook and groove over time. Assuming you have a decent hook, assuming you have a decent groove, assuming you have a mix that will just work, it's all about arrangement. Okay? That's what I want to hammer. And this track is just a masterclass in it because of how simple it is, but how powerful it is. So let's dive right into it, and we'll just talk about things as they come up. But right away, let's just start with the intro here. So this is very simple. We just got the beats, and I'm going to do a formula map up here. So we'll do formula. This is the HD2 formula. Like 90% of top tracks follow the HD2 formula because it tells an extremely compelling story to the listener. And so this is going to be intro again over here. Okay, and then of course what we'll do is we'll create just a beat channel. I'm not going to map out the drums because that's not what this is about. This is about just understanding how things lift over time, right? The development of the hooks and the lifts, hook and lift map. And so the hook is just that one thing, the boop sound design thing. And then the lifts are just how the track kind of lifts in energy over time. And a lot of that actually comes from the hook itself. And that's what makes this track so efficient as a production, is so much of the work is done by that one little boop sound design thing. There's some lifts in the drums, and lifts are just anything that lifts the energy. So like a ride, a shaker, some kind of hook that comes in that just lifts the energy. We want to map that out because those are the things that manipulate the energy over time. And so the hook and lift maps, we're looking at how the hook develops. We're looking at how the arrangement develops through the lifting and settling of energy by introducing sounds and taking them away. And so with the beat, we're not interested in dissecting the drums. We're just going to take the beat for granted, and we're going to see what things are added to the beat, to the groove, to manipulate the energy. So right away, one cool thing is that we're getting a little bit of a high pass of the bass. Now the kick is going to play a role in the bass line. You can hear that kick can continue, kind of like double kicks. So kicks are playing a role in the bass line. That starts off right away. And so this is a bit of a preview of the bass line. You might even call it a motif, but I would just really call this just a preview of the bass line here. And so we'll go ahead and just drop in bass just because of that. And so I'm just going to create a little thing here, and we'll just do HP kicks. So there's really two kinds of bass sounds in this track, and that's going to be the kick bass line, and that's going to be like the sub bass line. I'm going to just treat them the same because again we're not going that in deep. We're mostly interested in the arrangement. Great. So right away with the intro, one of the things that we're interested in with arrangement is the 5 levels of arrangement. And I'm going to write those out really quick. All right, so the 5 levels of arrangement here are the formula level. So this is following the HD2 formula. Okay, so HD2. And the HD2 formula is intro, bass drop, break 1, hook drop 1, main break and build, hook drop 2, outro. Okay? That's the HD2 formula. Then the relations are how do, and you know what? Let's just map this out. Okay, so really quickly, because then it'll make it easier to talk about these different levels. Okay, so intro. Then here we're gonna have bass drop, and this is a short bass drop. This is only 8 bars here, and then we're gonna have a 24 bar break section. So this is going to be break 1, and then we're going to have a 32 bar drop section here. This is going to be HD1, so hook drop 1, and then we're going to have the main break and build, which is pretty much exactly the same thing as break 1. Then we're going to have HD2, which is very, very close to the exact same thing as HD1, so HD2 is kind of a sandwich track then. So this is outro. All right. Okay, cool. So let's see here. So what we're talking about is the 5 levels of arrangement. All right, and the first level is the formula, and that's the HD2 formula. This is following the HD2 formula. Yeah, because HD2 is the main drop. So there's also like the HD3 formula, which is very rare typically, but producers that use it a lot would be like Biscuits, but even more than that would be Clooney, which is almost uses it exclusively, and Fisher used to use it a lot, and whoever's behind that project. But but everyone else almost all the time, without fail, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, the HD2 formula is going to be the arrangement formula that is used because it tells the simplest possible story for an idea. It is the most effective way psychologically to present an idea to the listener. The next level down are the relations. Okay, I might need to come up with a better term for this, but the relations are how do these. So here we have the formula level, right? And the next level down is the relations. How do these relate to each other? Okay, so how does HD2 relate to HD1? That's a question that producers have a lot, right? What do I do in the second drop? How do I develop it? A lot of times you don't need to, but that's a question, right? So one concept or term that I'll use to talk about relations is the idea of elevation. So how do we elevate HD2 over HD1? A lot of the times you want to have the same underlying hook structure in HD1 as you do in HD2, but in HD2 you can do things that elevate it over HD1. So for example, adding in more rides, adding in more tops, adding in more dramatic edits at the 8-bar or 16-bar sections. These are just ways to make it a little bit more exciting while still presenting the same underlying experience. And then that takes us to another concept. And really quick, that's another idea that you can think about with the breaks. How does the break elevate over the main break and build, elevate over the first break? Right, so these are relations. So once we talk about the formula level, the next level down is understanding how they relate to each other. And one of the core concepts there, like I just said, is elevations. And you can even think of variations too, very subtle variations. But another thing in the relation stage is understanding the story that is being told with the HT2 formula. So I said in the beginning that one of the most effective, the reason why the HT2 formula pops up so much is because of the story that it tells the listener. Okay, and the story is how these sections relate to each other, and it's a very simple story. So here in the intro, this is just the DJ, right? The DJ mixes in. That's what the intro is for. But then the bass drop introduces the groove for the first time. Okay, it introduces the bass line. This is teaching people how to dance to the track. Okay. And then in break one, this is where you'll introduce the hook for the first time. Give me 1 second here. So the bass drop introduces the bass line, and then the break typically will take that groove away. So you'll do like a high pass filter, so people aren't really dancing anymore, and it gives you the opportunity to present something new. Usually it's going to be the hook. And so the bass drop introduces the groove. The break one typically introduces the hook. And then in HD1, those two come together for the first time. So the groove and the hook come together. And with a bass drop, you don't want to put hooks over on top of it right away, because you need to teach people the groove before you start throwing hooks on top of it. Their subconscious needs to learn how to dance, how to move and groove to your groove, to the bass line, before you start overwhelming them or not overwhelming them, by putting hooks on top. The last thing you want to do is confuse and overwhelm them, and that's why these two sections here are typically separated. The bass drop introduces the groove, the full groove with the bass line. The break takes that groove away temporarily and introduces the hook and builds tension for when they're going to come together. And that's what I call the HD1 equation, is bass drop plus break one equals HD1. Okay? That's just the setup of the story. Okay, so these two sections right here, this is the setup for the story. They're introducing the characters. The story has not yet begun. Okay, the proper story of the HD2 formula is these guys right here: HD1, main break and build, HD2. This is the story of the HD2 formula, and it follows a classic Hollywood formula. Okay, like if you're going to go watch a Hollywood movie, there's 3 acts in a movie. Okay, and in the first act, okay, you're kind of like, it's called the hook, right? You're hooking them. And so here in HD1, we hook the listener because we're finally delivering the groove and the hooks, which is what they want. That's what they want. Okay, they want the hooks over the groove. And so that's what HD1 is all about. It gives them what they want. And then in the main break and build, or in Act 2, you take that away. Okay, you take away what they want. And so in some way, you take away the groove, right? In some way, you take away the hooks. They're not playing in full together anymore. You take it away. And then that builds, fundamentally, that builds tension, because you're taking away something that people like and that people want. And they're like, hey, I want it back. And so that's where HD2 comes in. HD2 is you give it back to them. And so that's Act 3. So the simple story of the HD2 formula is give them what they want, take it away in some way, and they give it back to them. So Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And in Hollywood, for example, the way that they label these is Act 1 is the hook, right? Just like we said. Act 2 is the build, where you build tension. That's exactly what we do here. And what are we building tension for? What ultimately releases that tension is giving them what they want back, giving them back what they want. And that is called the payoff. So Act 1 is the hook, Act 2 is the build, Act 3 is the payoff. And so that works in Hollywood blockbuster movies, and it's exactly the same reason why psychologically it works for the listener. Okay, think about it like even a 2-year-old. Okay, this works for a 2-year-old. In HD1, you give them what they want. Okay, that's like a toy. You give a 2-year-old a toy, they're happy. Okay, and then in main break and build, you take it away from them, they start crying. They want it back. Why are you taking away my toy? Right? It's tension. And then you release that tension. You pay it off. You resolve that conflict by giving it back to them. Now they're happy again. And it's such basic, fundamental psychology. And that's exactly what's going on here. And so when we're going back to the relations here, we can talk about the elevations, and we could talk about the story. And the story psychologically is the most important part, okay? And so we'll look at this here too. But okay, and then A-B structures is the reason why I even started down this path to begin with. So right in the intro, what I was going to say is that we have an A-B structure. And we'll map out the A-B structures too. Okay, so A-B structure. Because this track has structure. Okay. And the reason why I want to do all this is because this track is just flawless in its execution. It's doing everything that it needs to do. And it does it in the most simple way using the simplest sound. But even in the intro, we're getting what I call a clean A-B. Okay. So with the A section, we have just the high pass groove. And then in the B section, we have the full groove with a little bit of tops. So here's the A section. So high pass. Here we get the full kick, the full beat with some tops. Now, the reason why I want to point this out too is, like, if you're going to kind of follow a label to learn kind of what the best practices are, you could say, or what the rules are, the 80%, something I talked about in the Drug from Amsterdam video, then Toolroom is a great label to follow. They have everything dialed in with the tracks they release. The mixes are always on point. I would say 95% of the time. The arrangements are almost always on point too. So it's a great label to follow in terms of just learning just the best way to kind of approach producing tech house. I mean, they really output quality, and this is no exception. This is probably one of my favorite releases from them because it's just so efficient. Just checks off the boxes, but does it in a very creative way. Anyway, so right off the bat, we've got the A-B structure in the intro, and again, I'm just connecting that to the fact that, like, they just check the boxes. And right in the intro, we're getting a very clear box, which is a clear A-B. Okay, and so that's the A-B structure. We'll see that there's going to be some A-B structures here in the drops. Okay, and the breaks. Actually, it's just so well done. I mean, good God. Okay, so I'm going to move this over here, and so I'm going to have these already set up for when we talk about them. But here in the breaks, we also have an A-B structure. We have 16 bars of the A and then 8 bars of the B, and I'm going to bring this guy over here, and then the outro probably has an A-B structure as well. Okay, so I think it's probably just groove of the bass and then beats. Okay, but right off the bat, we're getting a nice A-B structure. The bass drop is just 8 bars, so there's not really much of an A-B structure that we could do there. So we'll just put in like a little clip just to have something there. All right. Okay, so let's see what else. Going back over to the formula. So we have the A-B structures. So that's simply dividing something into an A section and a B section. And we'll look at that because that's what this track does as well in a very effective, simple way. CLT stories, we'll get into that in when the time comes up. Punks and edits we probably won't look at too much in this track. but if they come up, I'll point them out. But the thing that I absolutely love about this track is these first four. The CLT stories, the AB structures, and yeah, those two in particular. So we'll look at those as we go through the track. So getting back into it. Okay, so in the intro we start off with just the high pass beats, then we get the full beats with some tops, and then we're going to get into the bass drop. Okay, so earlier I said that with the bass drop, you typically don't want to introduce the hook on top of the bass drop because you just want to introduce the bass line before you start throwing hooks on top. And the reason, and so right away here, they're dropping the hook, the sound design little boop thing, in right away. But the reason why it works here is because it's basically functioning as a percussion. It's doing the same thing every single time. It's not like a vocal that we need to digest. It's just one little, basically a sine wave, kind of, you know, a little bit of a Tommy kind of sound, just doing boom, boom, boom. And so it's digestible. It's not overwhelming. That's why it's okay here. That's why it works. But if we had like a vocal verse or a chorus and we chucked it over on top of the bass drop, that would not work. So it's just a different kind of hook. And so that's why it works here. All right, and then here we have the bass. So this is going to be the kick bass, and we'll also say the sub. All right, cool. All right, so obviously we have the boop thing. So let's get that in here. So boop SD. We'll color that the purple. Let's just map this out because the way that this evolves in the B section of the drops is very important. So we'll just map this out. So right there on the 16th note, that's what the whole thing does the entire time. Just kind of plays that. Let's just see if there's any kind of changes in the drums themselves. So not too many, and just for fun, we're kind of going a little bit off topic, but let's just check out the mix really quick. All right, so let's come over to the LFO tool. I just want to check out the low end and the top end. All right, and you know what? I've decided against it. But I might forget later on to do this, so I guess we're going to come back and do it. Okay, here we're going to do this right now. So let's just check out the loudness. So let's look at this. So right here in the bass drop, we're sitting at -6. That's great. That's a great loudness level to hit. It's loud. -5 would be very, very loud. That would be like... the loudest I would want to go, -5. -6 is what I almost always shoot for in my tracks. If I get it a little bit louder, -5.5-ish, then I'll be happy. But -6 is, if it's sitting around -6, then we're good to go. It's going to sound loud. It's going to sound aggressive. It's going to sound exciting. It's going to sound punchy if we do things right. -7 would be like the safest way that I would recommend most producers, because -7 is going to sound open, it's going to translate in the club, it's going to hit, but this is at -6, and this is exactly where I try to hit with my tracks. So that's cool. Let's check the spectrum. So we got the kick just sitting right around -6 here in the spectrum analyzer. We got the bass line sitting right here in the translation window from -6 to -12. Okay, look at this flat line in the top end. That's interesting. Okay, but the top end, let's go right around 7K. We're sitting around -36. The window for the top end is typically -35 to -40. So this is exactly where it needs to be. Okay, cool. And now with the LFO tool, what I want to do is look at the levels of the kick and bass relationship. So I'm going to turn on this low pass filter here, and this low pass filter feeds the LFO tool. So let's check this out. So what I like to see is that the kick is if we change the snap value here to 8, that the kick is just above 1 click down here. Okay, and so he's just right there, and when you're right there, that usually is what translates to hitting to around -6. But if I personally would like to bump it up just a little bit more, but that's totally fine. Obviously it's fine. This track had a #1 track, but for you watching, I'm giving you the benchmarks, and this track is just nailing all the mixing benchmarks. Okay. And what I like to see with the bass line is the bass line typically is around 2 clicks down. And now the interesting thing about this bass line is that it's dynamic. So the sub is actually really quiet, but you can see the double kicks that we talked about earlier are pretty loud. And so this is just an interesting thing to do. And so the bass line on average, you could say, between the sub and those kind of double kicks averages out to around this line. But the reason why this is so cool is because the bass line is dynamic and level. Right, so we have that sub that you still feel it. You still feel that lower kind of quality, that kind of and then so these guys down here. But then you're getting this kind of rhythmic punch from this kick that also plays a role in the bass line, and that kick is hitting pretty hard. Okay, so if we actually change this to a snap value of 16, the kick, that guy's hitting right around here. Even higher. Good Lord. You'll see that the reason why it's spiking a little bit up to here is because that kick is playing over the bass. And you'll see that sometimes the bass and that kick will add up and it'll spike right here. But there'll be other sections where the kick and the bass will phase cancel each other. So we'll have a phase boost and a phase cancel. So right here, example, this is a phase boost. These two lower spikes are where they're canceling. So what the producer's not doing here is they're not sidechaining these kind of secondary kicks to the sub, because you can see the phase going on here. You can see the phase effects, both boosting and cutting. And the reason why it works is because it's still translating, because like the kick is still hitting. And so that's an interesting move. I like that. It's going to make it sound a little bit grittier, a little bit dirtier with these when they're stomping on each other. But one thing to pay attention to is that kick is still hitting, just on average, a little bit harder than even those double kicks over here. Just a little bit harder. And that's what's most important, is making sure that the kick drum wins over the bass line. But again, this is a slightly different case scenario for the bass line because it's a little bit unique. It's not a typical bass line where you want to hover around, down here. This is a bass line that has a kind of a more quiet sub, so kind of around here. And then a kick that kind of creates rhythm in the bass line that hits a little bit higher. So very cool bass line. And very cool idea, very cool mixing the way that it's happening. And then let's also look at the top end now. So I've filtered everything below 1000 hertz. And let's just look at what the top end is doing. Now with the top end, if we switch the snap back to 8, what I like to see is the hat hitting around 1 click down in the top end. Okay, or above. Okay, this is a very loud hat here. Look how short that is. That's interesting. And that clap is really loud. Typically the clap sits around here. Usually it'll sit around here. Just under 1 click down. Kind of in between 1 click down and 2 clicks down. So if we just go to, there we go. So 1 click down and 2 clicks down. Okay. But the clap and hat are very loud in this. And the interesting thing about the loud clap is that since there's a little bit of headroom on the kick, because it's only hitting around -6 right here, there's a little extra room for the clap to hit loud. And so this clap is pretty loud. And that hat's really loud too. But the short sounds just create so much room in the mix. It's really cool. Anyway, so that is just checking out the mixing benchmarks. And the point is they're just nailing him. I mean, that's it. so there we go. So we got we're introducing the bass line, we're introducing the simple hook here. So now we're getting into the break, okay? And remember, we're interested in the A-B structure. So let's just throw in some down effects here, so we could do some effects down. All right, and let's see what happens. Okay, and this is we're going to start talking about the efficiency of this production. It's incredible. Okay, so here we go. So first, let's just do some high pass here. When we're in a break section, what do we do? What do we want to do in a break section? All right, so let's just write this out. So breaks, and let's see if they're checking the boxes, right? The 80%. So with the breaks, number one, the thing you want to do is actually give them a break. So this is basically just high pass, or just remove the kick and the bass in some way. Take away the groove in some way. Second thing you want to do is introduce something new. Okay, and you don't necessarily need to introduce a new sound, but you need to do something new is probably a better way to say it. Maybe new or different. And so what we're going to see in this track is that this track takes that boop sound and it does something different with it. It's going to do this loop effect that creates a lot of chaos and builds a lot of tension. And that's the third thing we want to do in a break section, is just build tension. Okay, because we want people to get excited about the upcoming drop. And so these are really the three things that we want to do with a break. And so that's exactly what happens in this track. So we just get in with a high pass here. So check it out. So they just remove the kick, actually. I'm interested to see, and they remove the bass, but I don't think they remove the sub. So we can this is the sub, very simple, right? So we could just keep the sub going here. But they did remove those kind of kick bass things, you know, like the kick bass. I don't know how else to say it. Oh, getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're checking off this box to give them a break, but now what we're doing is something new and different. So we're taking that boop and we're doing something new with it, and we're doing a loop effect. And the way that this is working, and let me just find a stab sound really quick. So just to kind of bring you into the fold here. That could be that'll work. So let's drop this in here to C1. Okay. And what's going on is I'm going to drop this onto a new channel here. Okay. And then what we need to do is legato these notes. So I'm going to actually hit Command J. So, and then we'll do legato. There we are. And what's happening with this sound is if we change it over to classic mode here, we need to turn loop on, okay? Okay, so I think we need to go put the MIDI onto C1, or right there. Okay, so what's happening, their sample's a little bit longer than ours, but what's going on is the MIDI continues to play on that 16th note in the original track, but what's happening is they're shortening the loop on the sound, and so it always hits in the same spot, but the loop is getting crazier and crazier. And so let's do that. Let's show automation and new lane, and let's just bring that loop down over time like this. Okay, and then we can kind of extend this out. Let's go like this. Command J. Let's duplicate. Let's delete the. Oh wait. Do one more here. Duplicate this. Okay, so it goes like this. All right, and then maybe not. So that's what's going on here, okay? And then, you know, if we get something like Endless Smile, we can kind of push that out. Okay, something like that. Very, very cool. Okay, so that's the new thing that's going on. So that's the new and different thing. But this at the same time builds tension. Okay, and so this is what's so efficient about the track. Is like when I mean, he has risers. So one of the things that we could do to build tension is risers, right? But the ingredient that's building the most amount of tension is the hook itself. So here's what's important about that. The hook is what people pay attention to. As producers, we can hear everything in a track for the most part. But lay people, right, who listen to music can't. So there's one thing typically that they pay attention to. That's the hook. They can identify it. Ooh, that boop sound, that's so cool, right? Ooh, let's dance. There's a drum beat going on, right? They don't know what a kick is, really. Maybe some people do. They don't really know what a hat is or how the hat and the bass are going. They just take the whole groove for granted. They're not listening to that. They just want to dance to that. So they do pay attention to something else, and that's the hook. And so the reason why that's important is because the thing that people are paying attention to is also the thing that is telling them what to feel. Okay, because when we're in a break section, the reason why we're building tension is because we want people to feel tension because we're taking them somewhere else, and where we take them, we want that to feel good to them. We're like, hey, we're going to take you somewhere new, and it's going to be awesome. Okay, so that's what we want them to feel. But they still need to pay attention to something. So when we can get the thing they're paying attention to tell them what to feel, to make them feel what we want them to feel, that's very efficient because it's one thing playing two different parts. It's occupying the conscious mind because that's what they're listening to. It's also occupying the subconscious mind because it is it's conveying the emotion, right? And so the conscious mind is what they're listening to. Oh, you hear that sound? That sounds so cool, right? That's conscious. I'm aware of that sound. But the subconscious is what they're feeling, right? They're not sitting there being like, I feel tension right now. That's not what's going on. They just feel it. It's subconscious. But the sound, the hook, is doing the same thing. It's playing that one sound is playing two roles. It's occupying that conscious path of the mind, and it's also occupying that emotional subconscious path of the mind. And that's what makes this so efficient. This whole track is like this. It's one hook over one groove, and the hook does so much work throughout the track in terms of the emotional story and the energy story that's being told. Okay, so that's what I mean by efficiency. But we can see here that this track is just checking off the boxes in the break. We're giving them a break. We're introducing something new or different, and that is the chaos of the hook, and then we're also building tension. Two other things here that I want to talk about. Maybe I'm going to add this actually, contrasts. Contrasts play into the idea of tension, but not necessarily. So this might be a good thing to add to the breaks, kind of with an asterisk. Okay. But what I mean by contrast is there's two of them here that I really like. Number one is when we listen to the boop sound over here in the bass drop. That's very stable, right? We can just listen to it. And so one of the contrasts we can talk about here is stability versus instability. Another way to kind of phrase that good lord, dude, ability Another way to phrase that is chaos. Actually, maybe we should do order and chaos. Okay. So this is ordered. It's structured. It's stable. This is not. That is chaos. Okay. And so the cool thing about this is that sound is not just playing two things at once, not just doing two things at once, doing a lot of work is what I mean. Lots of work. And it's contributing to this contrast that's going to happen between the break and the drop. And so this loop effect that's going on the boop sound is creating a lot of instability, right? Instability is what builds tension because we crave that stability. It's creating a lot of chaos, right? And that's what builds tension. But, it's obviously we want to have tension and release in our music, but thinking about contrasts is another way to approach this and understand things. Is here what we want to do in the build is just create a ton of chaos, create a ton of instability. That way when we land in the drop, we feel stable again. We feel good. We feel like we're on solid ground. And I like that language because it's emotional, and music is ultimately emotional communication. But another contrast that's going on here is a little bit more technical, and that is the depth contrast. Depth contrast. So one of the things that we want to do in the break, there's actually another thing, good Lord, that I missed out on. Let's do this, 5, and then 4 here is Atmos. Okay. Actually, we should probably put Atmos after new and different. Okay, so let's put Atmos here. Okay, so Atmos is just creating an atmosphere, and Atmos here plays into the depth contrast. So these contrasts here are actually connected to the elements of the break itself. So stability and instability, chaos and order, that's connected to building tension because you want to build the tension in the break that gets released in the drop. All right, and so thinking about elements that will help you create that instability, create that chaos in the break, it's always worth thinking about. And this track creates a lot of chaos through that loop effect. But with the depth contrast, what you want to do in the breaks is this is a technical thing. Okay, so we're talking about the 3 dimensions of the mix. The 3 dimensions of the mixer, we have the frequency spectrum, so lows to highs. We have, and look at the camera here. So we have the frequency spectrum, so lows to highs. We have the stereo dimension, so left to right, or also we can divide that into mid-side. And then we have the depth contrast, and so that's front to back. Okay, front of the mix to the back of the mix. And one of the things that you want to do in the break is play with dimensional contrast. So you can do frequency contrast, you can do stereo contrast, but probably the most important contrast to create in a break section is front to back contrast. Okay, depth contrast. So what you do in a break a lot of the times is you expand, you grow things, you send them out into a reverb, and what that does is it takes the entire mix and it moves it back away from the front of the mix, puts it back there. Or another way to think about it is sometimes you can keep the elements up here, but if you just expand the depth of the mix with a reverb, it just feels like the mix is further away. It's just deeper. And then when that goes away, it feels like all of a sudden, boom, the mix just slams back in the listener's face. Okay? And so that's a contrast that you want to create. It just, now all of a sudden the drop feels so much more powerful because it's right there in your face. Okay? The break is over here, or just kind of off in La La Land, and then boom, that's what the drop feels like. It just feels, I think you get it. Okay, and so the reason why I bring this up is because this sound is doing that as well, and we can hear it explicitly. Check this out. This is so cool. Okay, so watch this. So there's a reverb on that sound, right? Okay, so we're growing with a reverb in that sound. But watch this. And we're going to work through this. But in the B section of the build here, we in the A section, we're just building and growing. Okay, we got risers. We're just building. That loop effect is getting more and more intense, I should say. Building more and more tension, creating more and more chaos. And then at the peak of it, then in the B section, we work our way back down. Okay, so the loop effect kind of goes away. But the other thing I wanted you to see here is that the reverb on the boop sound goes away. And so the sound becomes drier and drier. And the reason why that's so cool is because you're literally hearing the producer take away the depth of the break as we go into the drop, right? So I cannot imagine a clearer demonstration of the depth contrast than I can right here, because you literally hear the sound get drier and drier. So let's play that, okay? Okay, so especially right here, listen to this. You can hear the reverb on the boop sound. Hear that reverb? But over here, check this out. No reverb. Okay. As we approach the drop, the depth goes away. Okay, so what the mix looks like right now is with this reverb back over here. Okay, right here. Boom, we got that reverb back here. But then as we approach the drop, that reverb gets lower and lower, and we're getting closer and closer and closer to the front of the mix. And so this is such an insanely clear demonstration of depth contrast that, I mean, I hope the point is made. But it's definitely something to think about always when you're working on your music. Okay, so let's actually listen to the drop and map things out. But I really wanted to spend some time on that because this track is just so good in what it does. If you appreciate the simplicity and the efficiency of it, that's and what's going on. That's why I want to break this all down. I want you to appreciate the simplicity and the power and the efficiency of it. Okay, so you can hear what's going on. So we have the loop effect up. That defines the A section. So, okay. And then the B section is loop effect down. It's that easy. It's that simple. Okay. So we go up into chaos and we move back down into stability or order. Okay. And then the drums go away right here. Another thing we're getting is these effect sounds help take us to the very peak of it. And so having this go build in chaos and have that loop effect go all the way up, that's cool. But we need something to help us define what that peak is. And that's what these risers are doing right here. We need something that helps us make that transition, that helps us define when that transition is going to happen from up to down. And that's what that does here. Okay, that's what those risers really help us do. And then we have these downshifters. Really just like spill outs and whatever. Another thing that happens is the drums go away, right? So we're just kind of, now the track's kind of floating. And then all that's going to just explode when we finally land into the drop. And this is probably I've never ever heard anything like this, where you just have this sound that just keeps repeating and then that just rolls right into the drop. That's so cool. And if I was going to make a track like this, which I might for YouTube, I would play with this concept first. The first thing I would try when making a track like this is finding a sound that that's playing a rhythm, and then have that sound and rhythm go out into chaos, and then have that creep back down just like this, and then have that just roll right into the drop. Like, that's such a good idea. It's such a good idea. and you can definitely play with that. And so just a really cool way to go into the drop. We don't have what I call pipos. Pipo is a pattern interrupt and payoff. One thing you can think of is right here when we're building tension, this is like a pattern building tension, right? Just building tension, building tension, building tension. That's a pattern. And then that pattern gets interrupted here when we go back down. And so in a way, you can think of this whole last 8-bar section as a pipo, but not really. I mean, we are interrupting the pattern. A pipo is when we're building and building, we cut, we deliver a payoff, and then we go into the drop. So it's a lot more streamlined. This is just a creative execution of that. It's like we're building the pattern that gets cut, and then we're kind of just transitioning back into the drop. It's hard to really break down and describe, but it's just super cool. But the thing that is working is that this is moving, transitioning from a state of chaos into stability. It's evolving back into stability. So that's how I would analyze this. So if I was going to recreate this idea in my own way, that's what I would play with, is that movement, that evolution into chaos, and the evolution back into stability. Okay, so we also have that vocal texture that kind of creeps up here. It's like it sounds like a vocal texture to me. So Vox text, and I think this is part of the original, but this is just now an elevation of the HD1 over the bass drop. Right? Remember we were talking about elevations. How does HD1 relate to the bass drop? Well, let's see. Let's listen. So interesting that the bass drop has more tops in it. That tops lift will happen over here. But a couple things that are different about it is the HD1 has the boop synth. And realize that HD1 stands for hook drop 1. So this is where we start putting the hooks over it. And now we have the full presentation of the hook. So in the bass drop, we're holding back on the full expression of the hook. So there's a little bit of a low pass on that sound design thing. And then also in HD1, we have that weird kind of vocal texture. That would just be weird over here. We're not ready for that sound yet. And so we're going to get a little bit of a tops lift over here. So let's listen to that. And there's a tiny little edit right here. So we're talking about punks and edits. So one thing is just here at the edit. And edit, what it does is just prepares the listener for something new to happen. And something really new does happen right here. It's pretty subtle. But the new thing that happens is that we're just going to get a simple tops lift. But yeah, that's what it does. So when you have an edit, then something new needs to happen. And it can be subtle like we were just looking at here. But this is just a high pass, right? A little bit of a hat lift too there you can hear. Also a little bit of a clap lift too. I mean, barely. It's so subtle, but that's not over here. Much shorter sounds over here. So the sounds are getting slightly lengthened in the basic beat. Plus there's some extra tops that come in. And so the A section here is very simple, right? It's 16 bars, and it's just the boop straight, okay? Now, we can break down the CLT story here, but I want to save the CLT story for the end. So I'm actually going to make a note to myself over here, which is, let's just color it yellow so I don't forget. CLT story. Okay, we'll break that down over here because, and I'll explain why in just a second. But okay, God, this track is so good. It's insane. Okay, so So this is another. So this is another edit. So an important thing about edits is that, and with punks too, but we'll just look at edits because I mean, an edit is just a kind of punk. It's usually where you high pass something at the end of an 8-bar section. But the important thing is the hierarchy aspect of punks and edits. And so here you can see the edit at the 16 bar is more dramatic than the edit that happens at the 8 bar. And then if we get into the concept of punks, punks are what happen like inside of an 8-bar section. So we can have a punk at the 4-bar mark, so like a punctuation point, but a P4 or a P8, something that happens at the 4, something that happens at the 8, but the same hierarchy applies. Whatever happens at the 4 is going to be less dramatic typically than what happens at the 8, and that extends beyond the 8-bar into 16. So what happens at the 16 is typically more dramatic than what happens at the 8, and that's exactly what's happening here. It's just checking off all the freaking boxes. It's just flawless. It's so well done, right? It's checking off the boxes, but the execution of the entire track is creative and interesting, you know. Now, here's what's extra special about this. Okay, so this is going to be like effects on boop. Okay, the reason why this is so cool. Hold on, let me listen right here. Okay, so right here the boop is still pretty straight. We don't have effects on it because there's no change. There's no change to the boop in the next 8 bars. You see what I mean? But here we're putting effects on the boop. Why? Why are there effects on the boop? That's why this track is so efficient. It's so well thought out. Why are there effects on this right now? Because we're priming the listener. We're foreshadowing what's going to happen, which is where in the next 8-bar section, when we break into the B section, there's going to be a variation on the boop where there's now effects on it. Watch. There we go. There's your variation. The boom, boom, and then with that extra reverb on there. So we're getting a little bit now of a call response in the boop sound. Okay. So we need to obviously bring the boop over here. It's the main event here. But I'm going to color this white because I like to color clips that are white, just a variation on it. So now this is a call response, where it's a call, respond with a verb. Okay, so just to kind of label it a little bit, that's what's happening. And actually, for fun, let's consolidate this and just draw that out. Okay, so right here. And this kind of extends over here, you know, so might as well just kind of really push this over here. So this is kind of that punctuation point that closes the reverb back down, you know. We're kind of hanging and then boom, we just drop back into it. You see? So it's kind of a mini tension. Boom, 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 bum, boom, 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 bum. So really good. But the B section here is defined, going back to the clean A-B structures, the B section here is defined by, let's just do boop variations. But what I really want to say is they're just playing with the boop, right? So this is just straight, and this is just playing with it. And so so there's just a little bit of variation on here and a little bit of playtime. Okay, so let's... Alright, cool. So now what we're doing is settling the energy. So I'm just going to actually write this here because now we can get into the CLT stories. But now we're going to have a new variation. Okay, it's a lot of things going on. Also, we have a low pass on this now. Okay, so what's going on in this section? Well, we're taking away the tops lift. Okay. And so that's going to settle the energy, right? So when we remove sounds from the groove, that's going to settle the energy. Okay. And then what we also have is a transition, because this is pitching up now. Okay, the boop sound is pitching up. So it's telling people, it's kind of like a riser. A riser builds tension. Anything that rises in pitch in the frequency spectrum is telling us that we're going somewhere new. And so now we can talk about the CLT story. Okay, so the CLT story for me here, and the way that I want to think about it, is actually across the entire drop. If we look at the document here, we have AB structures, and then we have CLT stories. And the reason why I put AB CLT stories below AB structures is because, well, first of all, these 5 levels are working their way down. So the formula is the highest level. Then we're looking at how the individual sections relate to each other. Then we're looking at the individual sections themselves, so inside of them again with the AB structures and the CLT stories. And then down at the bar level with the punks and the edits. And so it's just working our way down into more and more specific parts of the track. But the reason why I put CLT stories below AB structures rather than like next to it is because CLT stories typically just apply inside of the AB structure. So what's the CLT story of the A section? What's the CLT story of the B section? And so if we look at just the A section, for example, it's a very simple CLT story. And CLT stands for chill, lift, and trance. And those are the 3 emotions, 3 energy levels that you can do in a section. So chill is just we're chilling. Just that's the energy right now. We're just chilling. We're enjoying the drop. When we lift the energy, it's like, oh, okay, now things are kind of picking up. I like this, right? Things are getting more intense. That's what a lift is. It's a sound that takes the energy to the next level. That instantly takes it to the next level. So we were here, now we're boom, now we're there. It's just a step up. And a transition is a sound that evolves over time and tells and basically lets people know that we're going somewhere new. And so it kind of raises the energy over time and tells them that we're going somewhere new. So a lift is boom, stepping up, and a transition is where we're kind of slowly evolving up into the next level. All right, so the CLT story of the A section here is very simple. We have a chill, and then we have a lift, because here we're just chilling here. And then we get an edit, which is telling us that something new is going to happen, and the new thing that happens basically is that we're lifting the energy. Okay. So we're getting more hats. We're getting a longer, kind of brighter hat. We're getting an extra thing on the clap. So we just feel a little bit more of the groove, and that's so chill lift here. Okay, but the reason why I wanted to save this conversation is because I prefer in this track to look at the CLT story across the entire drop, and I want to look at the CLT story not in terms of the groove, but in terms of the hook. Okay, because remember I said the hook is what it's all about in this track. So for me, the CLT story that I would play with if I was using this as a reference is it goes chill, because we're using just the straight boops, okay, and then chill, and then we're doing a lift here in the groove, in the hook, because we're getting that variation, and then we're doing a trans. And so for me, the CLT story is all about the hook, and it is telling a very simple story. And so it's just chill. We're just doing that straight boop on that 16th note, and then we're doing a lift in the hook by doing that kind of variation and giving that extra kind of reverb hit. Okay, that's a lift in the hook. And then finally, we're using the hook to transition, and that's where we're pitching up. But in the groove, we have a chill, and then we're lifting in this section by adding in the tops. That continues throughout. And then we settle by taking away that top stuff. Okay. And so the cool thing about it is that these sounds are working together. So the boop, by lifting up, is telling us that we're going somewhere new. And the drums, by settling and taking away the tops, is helping us settle into that lower state of energy as we enter into the main break. And so it's cool. When we think about like tech house and it's just hooks over groove, the reason why, again, this track is so efficient is because it just has those 2 elements to work with. The hook, which is that one boop sound, and the groove. And it's so interesting to see how these two elements are manipulated over time to tell a story. And so, yeah, and so this is the story of the hook here, where it's just chill, chill, lift, and then trans. And that trans is taking us somewhere new here. And then with the groove we see is helping us settle down into the lower state of energy as we get into the main break and build. And so it's so clear what's happening in the track. It's just, again, like, it's so well done. It's just nuts. Okay. So now we're getting into the main break and build, but the main break and build is literally the same thing as the first break. So let's just copy this over, and there might be some differences, but I don't think so. Let's check it out. No, because that low pass, that vocal texture has gone away. Pretty similar. I mean, slightly different sounds. Sounds like maybe there's a little bit more drum sounds going on here. But we get that loop effect, so it's the exact same story as before. Okay, it's just building tension for the return of everything else. So again, efficient, right? Like, not doing anything crazy here, just doing the same thing. I mean, because they understand the power of what they're doing. It's not like being lazy. It's like it's just an understanding of what's going to work, of what gets people's emotions going. And so what's going on here is they gave everybody that cool drop with the variation in the B section, and then they take it away. See, we're taking it away over here. Okay, we're taking it away, going back to the elements of the build. It's the same things, okay? We don't need to necessarily introduce something new in the main break and build, because that's what this is all about. Remember, the setup over here, the bass drop and the break one, these are about the setup, right? It's about introducing the characters. Then the characters come together in the first part of the story in HD1. Then we just need to take that away in some way. That's what Act 2 is about, tension. And so we take away the groove. That builds tension because people want the groove back. But then we also take away from them the stability of the hook sound, right? And we're just sending out into chaos. And that's why this works. That's why you could do it again, because we're just taking away what they want. They just want that stable groove and that stable hook, and this is just sending them off into chaos. And we can't help it. We can't help but feel the tension that we're supposed to feel as a result of these moves, okay? And then, so obviously the tension builds, the chaos builds, the instability builds through that loop effect that we looked at. Then that settles down, okay? And we have some supportive elements to help us with that emotion, which are the risers and the downshifters. And then once again, with that depth contrast, we start with a reverb, and then we just get more dry. And so we're moving the mix from the back to the front, okay? From unstable to stable. Those are like the two big contrasts in this track, okay? And so then it just goes right into the next section, right? Okay, so what's the difference now? So the only difference really between this drop and this drop is that this one comes in with the drums full. So it's just slightly more exciting. So when we come in here in HD1, it's not full. Here it is. We got the tops, we got that brighter hat, we've got that longer clap. And so this is an example of a very simple elevation. Again, just checking the boxes. Checking the boxes, right? Okay. And then it's the exact same thing. It's the same thing that happens, right? We're going to get that straight boop over here. I'm just going to move these tops over here, and I'll color this white just to highlight the fact that this is a difference from before, okay? And you know what? Let's even just write it on here. When we're talking about lifts, when we're talking about trans elements, when we're talking about elevation elements, it's always a sound something that does it, something that performs it. And so in this case, it's just those extra tops that come here. That is the elevation, right? Could be a ride, could be something else, but this is the elevation here, these extra tops, okay? So we're having to chill, so we're getting the straight 16ths. Boom, 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 same thing over here. Okay. And then, of course, we just lift. And the thing is we don't need to do things that are crazy all the time. The importance of the word chill is, dude, just chill out. Let people enjoy the moment. And that's what this is all about here. Now, once again, we're getting the effects because he's previewing what's to come in the next section, which is that variation with the effects. Just mind-blowingly simple, mind-blowingly efficient, mind-blowingly good, you know. Did we have that crash over here? Okay, it's cool. A little bit of a crash to signify we are transitioning, right? We got that low pass pitch on the boop, settled in the drums. All right, and now we pretty much have a reverse intro, right? So if we look at the intro, if you consider the bass drop kind of part of the intro, which I don't personally, but I mean, it would kind of make sense, I guess, you know. But I like to think of the bass drop as something separate. But if we did treat it as part of the intro, then you can see the intro and the outro are pretty much the same thing, just in reverse. So here we have the bass drop, which is the groove plus that low pass boop. And then here the first 8 bars of the outro are the groove plus the low pass boop. And then the first 16 bars of the intro are beats, and the last 16 bars of the outro are just beats. But the one difference between the intro and the outro, as a not just a pure reverse of it, is that the boop continues through the outro. All right, so let's just go ahead and map out the rest of this here, and then we'll get the bass going over here. We'll get this, we'll just put LP for low pass. Also put it over here. Okay. And so the bass is gone, but the kick is still there, right? So we'll do the kick bass. Okay. And then what's over here? So same thing. Interesting. So the tops actually come in here through the outro. So right here, the tops aren't in, but they come back through the outro. So that's just a creative choice. Tops are still here. Obviously, we don't have the sub, right? Cool. All right, there we go. And that is that. Just coming back over here, there's also a couple of notes that I took on this. Might be worth looking at really quick. Okay. So getting back to our document here, we saw the 5 levels of the arrangement. We talked about that a lot. We looked at breaks in particular too, and looked at the different things that we could do there. And I might add contrast to the mix here because it's really good to think in terms of contrast. One thing I want to add that wasn't in the track, so I'll just put this in parentheses, is like a frequency contrast. This is another kind of important one, which is where you can restrict the frequency spectrum. So you bring down the highs, you bring down the lows, and that kind of naturally happens in this track, and I'll talk about that in a second. But you bring down the highs, you bring down the lows. That way when you explode into the drop, you fill out the extremes of the frequency spectrum. The lows come in and the tops come back in, right? It's easy to think about the lows for us because, of course, when we go into a break, we remove the lows. But then when we go into the drop, boom, the lows come back in. But the same thing can apply to the top end too. So if you bring down the top end, you can just have a restricted frequency spectrum, and then it explodes into the drop. And so that's a frequency contrast, a spectral contrast. And the contrast is simply restricted and then full. Okay. And so that's that. And naturally, this track does that because it takes away the drums, basically. Okay. So here, when we go into the, here we have the groove. So we have the full top end and we have the full low end. So right there, we immediately start restricting the low end, but the top end is still there. But then there's I think there's probably a slight low pass on the... It sounds like it's just kind of going away in volume. But then when we take the drums out, now the lows aren't there whatsoever, and the highs aren't there whatsoever. And so this is a restricted frequency range just because the elements that fill out the top end and the low end, they aren't there. And so it's a natural frequency contrast. And then when we explode into the drums, obviously we're getting the full drums, right? That's a contrast. No drums, drums. But then also the drums are filling out the top end and the low end. So we're getting that frequency contrast restricted to full. And those are the, just thinking about what contrasts you can make between the break into the drop is always a fun thing to do. And it's always going to make the drop more impactful, the more contrast that you're able to kind of create. That are appropriate, obviously, for the track. But let's now look at some of these notes, because the hook tells the story. I always say that CLT stories are most effectively carried out by the hook. And so when we're talking about chill, lift, and trans, when we're talking about lifting, one of the best things that you can do is lift with a hook. Right? A good example of this is "Let Me Take You." The second 8 bars of the drop, they lift with a vocal hook. Okay. Now you can obviously lift with rides, you can lift with shakers, you can lift with any sound, percussion, blah, blah, blah. But again, remember, people are paying attention to the hook. So if you can get the hook to also tell the CLT story or the emotional story or the energy story, then that's what's going to be most effective, because it's going to stand out to the listener, right? The thing they're paying attention to is also the thing that is responsible for what they're feeling subconsciously. And so it's very efficient and it's very effective. So CLT stories are most effectively carried out by the hook, and that's what this entire track is in a nutshell, is this hook telling the story over time. It's telling the story of it's telling the tension story in the breaks, because the hook is the thing that's building the tension, and it's telling the CLT story in the drops, which is chill, chill, lift with a hook variation, transition with the hook pitching up. And so it's doing all of the work. It's doing most of the work, 80% of the work, because the the groove is doing some work too by lifting with the tops or taking the tops away. So that's doing some work in terms of the energy over time and the development. But the hook is doing most of the work, and that's why this track is so efficient. The boop is mostly what defines how the track changes over time. It's the lift, it's the trans, it's the chaos, it's all of it. Okay. Second note, when the boop synth approaches the drop from the break, the chaotic effects and the reverb diminish. So this is a great example of using one sound, of creating a certain one sound to create certain contrast between the break and the drop. So we talked about that at length, the depth contrast thing. Okay, and then also the tension release contrast, right? The chaos stability contrast. Do the least is the third note here. There's one hook and one groove, and the interest of the track comes from changing these two things. The groove lifts and falls through the drops. The boop tells the CLT story in the drops, chill, chill, lift, and trans, and it serves as the main tension element in the builds. Tech house is just hooks over groove. Here, it's the hook. It's hook over groove, okay? Not just hooks over groove, but hook over groove. And arrangement is how these are manipulated over time. There is no more pure example of how an arrangement can evolve than this track, because it's just one hook and one groove, and those are the two things that are changing over time. Okay. Now, I guess there would be another pure example, which is not having a hook, so it's just a groove track, and then seeing how the groove evolves over time and tells the stories over time and builds the tension over time, right? But when we're talking about hooks over groove, it can't get any purer than this, because it's one hook over one groove, and it's amazing. Okay, cool. And then a couple last notes here. Clean A-B. The A is just the straight groove with the boop, and the B, and we're talking about the drops here. And the B is the boop variation, or just playing with the boop, okay? The call response between the straight and then the reverb, and then the pitching of the trans. And then, and then another note here is the CLT story. The A, B, so the first two 8-bar sections, the first 16-bar sections is chill with the boop in the groove, and a little bit of lift in the B with the, a little lift in the B section, not in the B section, but in the B, so the second 8 bars. And then a definite hook lift in C, so right here we're talking about the third 8-bar section, so A, B, C, D. I know that's a little confusing because I also talk about the A section and the B section, but when we're just talking about like HD1, A, B, C, D, the A, B, C, D refers to the 8 bars. So yeah, I know it could be a little confusing, but I think you get it at the same time. You could think of capital B and lowercase b, right? So this is a capital B section. This is a lowercase b right here. So the second 8 bars. Okay, so with the A, B here, chill with the boop in the groove. So that's right here. And then in the B, and then a little bit of lift in the B with the tops. And then a definite hook lift in the C. And then a definite trans in the D with the boop pitching up. Okay, so again, just going over the CLT and AB. Remember in the beginning I said these two things, the AB structure and the CLT story, are what make this track. I just love this track and how efficient it is. So efficiency, last note. This track is so efficient. From the intro through the drops is pretty much a sandwich track. So sandwich is when HD1 equals HD2, and there's a little bit of an elevation in HD2 with the full drums coming in right away. But it's also efficient in the storytelling and the use of his hook. So just wanted to cover those last notes because those were kind of the first impressions I wrote down when I listened to this track. But hopefully this is inspiring. This track is so inspiring to me. Yeah, and again, it's just checking off all the boxes that we talk about, both the mixing boxes and with the arrangement, the CLT stories, the AB structures, the HD2 formula, all of it. It's just incredible. So if you got any questions, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, really enjoyed this one. I'll leave a download for this as well if you want to play with this arrangement structure. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.